No, Canadians can't go abroad. All they can do is get in their small vehicle and have a small break. Why won't the government take the tax off so that they can afford to do that?
You'd have to drive. I was wrong, and I admit it. It wasn't 37,000 kilometers. It was 44,000 kilometers to get the benefit that they're talking about.
His wacko math gets even worse. He's talking about vacations of 44,000 kilometers. Those are the vacations his boss takes.
It seems that we have, in fact, underestimated the wacko math of the Conservative Party of Canada. So you could, in fact, drive from the North Pole to the South Pole and back, and you would have some kilometers left.
Debate in the House of Commons here today ahead of a vote on the Conservative push for a summer fuel tax holiday. The latest heated axe the tax debate to hit Parliament Hill comes as one of the ministers you saw in that clip, Steven Guilbeault, announces the government is now accepting applications for $500 million in municipal climate adaptation funding, so climate adaptation funding for cities. First announced back in 2022. Now, Steven Guilbeault is the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. He's also here in studio. Hi, Minister Guilbeault. It's good to see you.
Hello, Vassy. Very happy to be here.
I really appreciate you coming into studio. The first question I have is centered on the announcement that you made today, and in particular about the amount of money, $530 million over 8 years. Analysis from the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and the Insurance Bureau of Canada says local governments need $5.3 billion a year to adapt to climate change. Why does this come up so far short?
Well, actually, if it was the first time we invested money to help municipalities adapt, I would also be, screaming, but it's not. Since 2017, our government has invested about $6.6 billion to work with municipalities and others across the country be better prepared to face the impacts of climate change. So this announcement this morning brings it to over $7 billion. But I'll be the first one to acknowledge we need to do more. And that $5.3 billion that you referred to is not only federal government, like provinces, municipalities, even the private sector in some instances will need to step in. So it has to be a team effort. And now we have a national adaptation strategy, and our plan in the coming months is to sign agreement with provinces where we would agree what everyone needs to do and also what everyone needs to pay.
So let me expand on that, because I think that's actually a really interesting point, because I've done a number of interviews with premiers asking them what their plans are. They don't have specific money in many instances attached to this. Are you going to actually emerge from those agreements saying this much money by this time, this much money by this time, and will it essentially amount to something in and around $5 billion a year? Because this is far from it at this point.
Well, that's the theory. I mean, what we're hoping to do is sit down with each and every province and territory and say, okay, well, here are the federal programs. Here's what the province or the territory can do. How much more do we need to do, and who does what? And clearly the federal government needs to do more. I'll be the first one to recognize that. But it can't just be up to the federal government. It needs to be an all-hands-on-deck approach, and provinces and territories need to do their fair share.
Can you attempt, and I don't imagine that you know the exact figure at this time, but sort of quantify or qualify how much more you envision the federal government will need to do? I think one estimate that your government put forward is something to the tune of disaster-related losses. And the average annual cost, rather, of disaster-related losses is projected to reach $15.4 billion by 2030. Again, I'm not saying you're not doing anything, but $7 billion, even I don't even know to what degree the provinces chip in. Like, this is a massive issue. Are you prepared, I guess, to meet the moment in that respect?
We know that over the last decade, Vassy, the cost to Canadians of climate impacts has increased tenfold. It used to be about $200 billion per year about a decade ago. It's gone up to $2 billion a year. Last year, in fact, largely because of the forest fires, will be north of $3 billion. So those costs are mounting. And the reality is that we're paying. And a dollar we invest today in being better prepared and helping our communities being better prepared is $13 to $15 we'll save down the road. So it is an investment, which is why I'm hoping. I mean, we now have we have the theory of what we need to do. We have a plan that all provinces and territories have agreed to. We have municipalities are on board, Indigenous nations, the Insurance Bureau of Canada helped us a lot, the Red Cross. We've worked with a lot of experts. Now we have to figure out how do we implement that plan and how much does it cost. But it will be in the billions of dollars. Yeah. There's no doubt about it.
Should Canadians be concerned at all about the speed with which your government and other governments will act? And again, I'm not trying to intimate or imply that your government doesn't understand the scale of this issue. But you have been in power for 9 years, and I was covering massive floods in Calgary 10 years ago. Like, you, of all ministers there, know the impact that climate change is having on our communities and how devastating it has been. It didn't just start being devastating. Why did it take as long as it did to release the adaptation strategy? Why is it taking so long to even have these meetings with provinces to come to formal agreements so that Canadians can look and say, okay, this is what's going to happen going forward?
The National Adaptation Strategy was 2 years in the making because we wanted to make sure we had everyone on board. We could have gone with just a federal plan, a federal strategy, but because of the magnitude of the problem, but also because the federal government can't do everything. If you're thinking of urban planning, for example, federal government isn't really involved in urban planning, yet it has huge impacts on whether you allow a community to go and build a new housing development in a floodplain or potential floodplain. So same thing with wildfires. So we need to work together so that everyone and with all our specificities and the powers that we have to do different things can come up with what the plan.
Even if it holds the country back, though, from again meeting the moment.
Well, I don't. We need to do more, and $7 billion is not everything that we need to do, but it's not nothing either. And it's the first time, like, before we came into power, there was almost nothing invested in adaptation. We're talking some hundreds of millions of dollars, but certainly not in the billions, and certainly not $7 billion. So we are. I'm not saying. I don't think we're not meeting the moment.
That.
We're not there yet. But we need to get. And I agree with you. We need to pick up the pace. There's no two ways about it.
Okay, I want to switch gears and ask you about what was going on in question period today in the past few days in the House of Commons. The Conservatives have proposed this fuel holiday for the summer. And your party, your government, is contending that the math they're using is wrong. They're saying X hundred of dollars, $600 on average,
Ontario,
900 as much. You guys say you'd have to drive almost forever in this country to reach those kinds of savings. Let's say it's conservatively only a couple $100. Isn't something for Canadians? Like something saved, isn't that material to Canadians even at a few $100?
Well, what the Conservative never talk about is the fact that where the federal carbon pricing system is applied, people are better off. They get more money. 8 out of 10 families get more money than what they pay. They never talk about that. So if we were to remove carbon pricing, then we would have to remove the rebate, and we would be literally taking away money from people, number one. Number two, it would cost billions of dollars to the federal government. And Mr. Poilievre says, well, for every dollar we spend, we have to tell Canadians where we will take that money, what we will cut. They never talk about that, but it would be billions of dollars to taxpayers if we did that. And their numbers are completely out to lunch. And it's not just us saying it. We've seen over the weekend university professors, Calgary University and others saying that to achieve the savings that the Conservative Party of Canada is claiming, you would have to drive 44,000 kilometers. So you could go from the North Pole to the South Pole and back.
I understand. I'm not justifying their math with respect, Minister. But I think that what they're basing their proposition on is a sentiment reflected to them through people, which is often reflected in my email inbox. For example, just before I got here, I got an email from an individual who said, gas companies are charging GST on the carbon tax for me. Like, regardless of the message that you're sending around the fiscal impact as analyzed by the Parliamentary Budget Officer of more Canadians being better off than worse off, they don't feel it.
Well, and it's also interesting that the Conservative Party of Canada never talk about the price gouging by the companies. Recently in Quebec, overnight gas went up 20 cents. That's 7 times the increase of carbon pricing this year. 7 times. So if we really want to go after price gouging and helping people get a break, we should work together to ensure that oil and gas company can't simply increase the prices the way they are. They should be more surveillance. And the Conservative Party of Canada doesn't want to touch this. They don't want to talk about this because they really want to make sure that we do nothing that could affect the oil and gas industry in Canada and their very generous profits.
And certainly, it's not my job to absolve them of those questions because they deserve them as well. But the NDP, for example, has put multiple propositions on the table over the past few years, specifically since the pandemic, asking your government to levy some sort of excess profit tax on those exact companies that you just talked about, and your government has refused to do so. So are you also not as afraid as the Conservatives then, if that's the way you're framing it, of going after these oil companies and their profits?
Well, big difference between, many big differences between us and the Conservatives. First, the finance minister has imposed a tax last year in last year's budget, an excise tax on an excess profit tax on oil companies, number one. Number two, in the last 2 years alone, we've put a number of different regulations out there to ensure that companies, oil and gas companies, invest in reducing the environmental impact of what they do, whether it's clean fuel standards to ensure that refineries reduce the environmental footprint, whether it's making sure that...
But that's not the same thing as advocating on behalf of consumers. You're talking about
well,
environmental regulations, which I would never take away from. But
if we talk
this
about
is about
vehicle
going after the oil companies that you say are disproportionately gouging consumers.
If we look at vehicles, for example, making sure that by 2035, 100% of cars are zero-emission vehicles, so either hydrogen or electric vehicles. That will help, according to independent analysis, that will help average family in Canada save about $3,000 per year. $3,000 per year, not a few hundreds. 3,000. That's another thing that the Conservative Party of Canada is opposed to.
That's a fair point. And I think that over the long term, there's, of course, a realistic possibility that those savings will be borne out. But people are feeling, like, I mean, the food prices have gone up 20% in the last 3 years. I think the reason that the Conservatives' pitch resonates, regardless of the math, which, as you rightly point out, may not be totally accurate, is because they feel like they can't afford anything. It is super expensive to fill up their cars. You're saying the Conservatives aren't willing to go at the oil companies because they're worried about these corporate overlords. But the NDP has propositioned your government multiple times. Here's what you can do, and you have not.
We've done some of it, and certainly when it comes to making sure that they pay for their pollution, we've done more than anyone else.
Are you willing to go further? If in fact the price does go up 20 more cents in Quebec?
I'm the Environment Minister. You can ask me all the questions you want about what we can or should be doing on environment issues. Obviously, on fiscal issues, you will have to talk to my colleague, the Finance Minister.
I will save that for Minister Freeland. Minister Guilbeault, I appreciate you making the time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vassy.